Hello and welcome to episode 13 of Diary of a Folk Witch. Diaries are somewhere where we can record our deepest feelings and secrets, but some secrets are worth sharing. So join me in my walk through living folk witchcraft, through the use of diary entries and informative discussions and occasionally the odd monograph or two. Welcome to my world. It is snowing. As the month of Samhain progresses on nicely, the temperature begins to drop. The fires of the last 2 weekends, bonfires, fireworks displays and leetings have now died down, and now snowflakes drift steadily to rest upon the ground. As I open my porch, I'm comforted to see an already existing blanket of white lace-like snow upon the ground. Large flakes quickly descend, and all around me it is quiet. It is past midnight now, and I've been up late watching one of the children who wasn't sleeping well. They sat beside me on the sofa, watching me spin on my spinning wheel until they eventually, gently fell asleep. I sometimes find that I too almost fall asleep while spinning. Spinning is naturally a very hypnotic skill. It's easy to see why there's so much folklore, fairy tales and magic associated with these magnificent tools, or why some believe that some mortal women could even influence one's fate through the act of making yarn, lace, cotton and so on. As you sit there carefully teasing fibre to be twisted and pulled up into the flyer and neatly wound around the bobbin while you pedal the main drive wheel around and around, you can't help but find that you often drift into a trance-like state, especially so with my old wheel that I picked up from a fellow spinner over in Pendle. I always smile at this. It feels so apt that my first ever wheel came from Pendle. It adds something additionally magical to the wheel. This particular wheel is a beautiful old brown mahogany spinning wheel that when you succeed in finding her right rhythm, she makes a magical tick-tock sound while you pedal and spin. So, as I begin my task of spinning some deep blue merino yarn to make me a casting square working, I feel the magic begin. The magic isn't just held within my intention for creating a casting square for the purpose of releasing an emotional baggage that I no longer need or want to carry, but it's also in the paced way that my foot works the single treadle, the speed of the wheel, the colour of the fibre that I've chosen to work with, in this case a deep blue for emotional healing. The way my hands work in a paced dance-like motion to tease the right amount of fibre at exactly the right speed for the flyer and bobbin to take up and to twist, and that peaceful and magical tick-tocking sound. Tick-tock, tick-tock, the wheel goes round like the clock. Tick-tock, tick-tock, from distaff to the dock. The strand twists and is led away to spin a working this day. Tick-tock, tick-tock, I spin a thread of fate. Spin too fast and oh no, too late, the cord runs thin and snaps. Or spin too fast and tease too slow, and it spirals into springs. But tick-tock, tick-tock, to sing the song of the wheel, for tick-tock, tick-tock will spin a spell for real. This is just one little verse that I created, partly from organic inspiration while spinning, and partly to help me keep time. There are, of course, many old songs and rhymes that spinners used to use to help them keep time, or work spells and intention into the yarn that they span, or just to pass on old folkways and stories. I like to sing the song Methil and Gwyn's from the TV show Poldark, not for magical purposes but more for relaxation and the natural pentameter that the song brings, which automatically helps my foot keep pedalling at the correct speed. For more magical works I might use the old Pendle folk song. If not this, then maybe some other local folk songs or old spell songs. When I connect to music and old folk songs of the area in which I live in, it also helps me to connect with the energy of the landscape and the spirits of the land and all the people here that came before me. And I think that's a really important area of folk witchcraft, that we marry the landscape and we become one with it. And when we use it, we utilise its folk songs and folk ways and its stories and its history. It adds potent power to our workings and creates allies with ancestors of place. At other times I may sing more secret songs that I've either composed myself or that have been passed on to me by other witches and wise women spinners. I say women because spinning to this day is still a craft that's largely dominated by women, partly because it's quite a niche skill that can be expensive to pursue, therefore not so desirable or accessible to everyone, and also because it tends to be retired women looking for a new hobby to take up to fill their time, or creative folks like myself who like to learn dying arts and skills in order to keep them alive and preserve them. The art of spinning is also where we get the word spinster from, an outdated and derogative term used to describe an unmarried woman. Many deities also associated with this ancient craft, along with its sister weaving, as female. The three most obvious being Frigg from the Norse tradition, Athena from the Grecian traditions, and Minerva from the Roman. But of course there are also the Fates, and some would even speculate that both Brigid and Brigantia may have also been associated with spinning, owing to Brigid's close ties to lambs, lambing and sheep, as well as Ireland's rich history and industry in spinning, and Brigantia's close ties to the Roman Minerva. Of course, it is possible that both Brigid and Brigantia are the same goddess, but other than etymological and similar divine characteristics, we cannot say conclusively that they are one and the same deity. From purely a personal perspective, based upon my own working relationship with Brigid for most of my life, I do sit within the camp of that they, Brigid and Brigantia, are the same deity, as many others also believe too. But of course this is a topic that's hotly debated and one that will not be settled anytime soon, not unless any new historical evidence is unearthed. However, despite spinning still in 2024 being a very feminine-based hobby, it would be really lovely to see more people in general become involved in and enjoying and preserving this art form, no matter their gender identity. I hope one day my sons will learn to spin. My 4-year-old son is already interested in my drop spindle, one of, if not the oldest ways of spinning. He watches me and my youngest daughter spin on the drop spindle and is eager to try. As I tease the fibre, my 5-year-old daughter eagerly spins the drop spindle carefully but with energy and always in the right direction so that the fibre doesn't unply and then snap and drop. Hence one of the reasons this tool is called a drop spindle. I think when my Galway top fibre arrives, I shall let my son have a turn at this activity. As I sit here now spinning away, looking out the patio window at the snow, I wonder what songs my ancestors of both my father's and mother's side would have sung while spinning. My mother's ancestors, the Baxter line, were seemingly originally from the West Country, and they worked as spinners and weavers. There are seemingly no obvious spinners on her Kelly side of the family. They were nearly all miners in the northeast of England after fleeing the Angorta Moor in Ireland, or more commonly known as the Great Famine. But far more recently, and still within some older families' living memories, are those of my father's side of the family from Ireland. Being as they were farmers from County Tyrone and Donegal, it was almost certain that most of the women would have spun as part of their cottage industry. I know that my great-grandmother Sarah, from whom I get my middle name, used to spin. Donegal in particular was well known for its spinning industry, so it's almost certain that ancestors here spun too. One of my deep sadnesses in this lifetime is that I never got to see the farm that my grandmother grew up on back in Ireland. I have photos of my father there as a child. He stands next to his sister and mother outside the typical single-storey stone and thatch cottage. I also have one photograph of my great-grandfather thatching the single-storey stone farmhouse roof. But that farm has long gone. It was sold in the 1980s and bought by someone who apparently illegally demolished it. They claimed it burnt down or fell down or some such lie, I forget which. But sadly, this happened all too often when people were denied planning permission. The same thing happened to another family member's ancestral home down in Devon. Happily, though, in this instance, the new owner was prosecuted and given both a hefty fine and a short prison sentence for his intentional destruction of a farmhouse and subsequent fraud. If only this happened more to property developers who claim perfectly structurally sound farmhouses just fall down when planning permission was denied. But this seemed to happen an awful lot around the UK and Ireland back in the 1980s and 90s. I wonder what wisdom has been lost in the last 70 or so years under the guise of progress. We can set up a brand new smartphone in seconds or plumb in a new washing machine in minutes, but most of us don't know how to make clothes, spin yarn, hunt, preserve food, tan leather and so on. In fact, many people are totally unaware of where their clothes come from, or the slave labour that goes into the fast fashion industry. I think that was one of the first rebellious sparks that led me down the route of learning about more self-sufficiency. Many years ago, when I started my Druidic Bardic grade, I reflected upon how many skills and arts we as a species are actively losing or have lost, often by design, over the last century. After all, it suits capitalist agendas if our children leave school with just enough education to be a consumer, but not enough to be independent. It was a tiny seed that year in 2013, I think it was 2013, from me beginning to buy second-hand clothes from second-hand shops and Facebook Market, to then learning how to crochet and sew. That seed then sent out other roots and shoots, growing my own food and learning permaculture and herbalism, to then training to become a doula, baby-wearing consultant and hypnobirthing teacher. Then keeping chickens and ducks and learning how to process any meat that came our way from community members that were gamekeepers, and how to not waste any part of that animal, the creature that paid the ultimate price. The meat may be eaten, but feathers, skins for leather and furs were, and still are, used in crafts. Bones are often used by myself for divination, and then when that's done, they're used to make nutritious bone broths. And any meat or organs that cannot be eaten are given to the cats. As a family, we are far from being completely self-sufficient yet, but together my husband and I are working towards manifesting this, birthing into reality our dream of being full homesteaders. But dreams like this take time and money. Full freedom from consumerism ironically takes money and a lot of privilege. My mind suddenly comes back to task now, because where the snow had temporarily snatched my attention with its beauty, the tick-tocking sound of the wheel brings my awareness back. The spinning of the wheel holds me now. She spins steadily, not too fast and not too slow. I haven't even realised my hands are automatically handling the merino fibre without much attention. My hands know the art so well now that my mind is temporarily free to be one with the spinning wheel. Tick, tock, tick, tock. Gradually I find myself in a state of trance, awake but no longer captivated by the realm of everyday reality that I sit in. I become aware distantly of my whisperings to the wheel as I tease and feed the fibre into the wheel, speaking aloud in hushed tones my spiritual energy and intention to create a yarn of peace, healing and surrender, so that it can then be formed into a casting square. I whisper my innermost thoughts and feelings. What it is I want to release, why this emotional baggage needs to be surrendered now, and what I know I will gain by doing so. As the bobbin fills with smooth blue merino yarn, the colour spontaneously transports me to a local flash, which is a lot like a lake. It is a place I often go to in order to relax or work with the spirits of the land. In my trance-like state, I see myself stood at my favourite spot by the flash. The moon shines above me and creates the illusion of silvery shimmers on the water that almost glitters. I call out to the spirit of this water. A shadow appears just above the lake's surface, a vague female outline cloaked and shrouded by the night. I welcome her and thank her for her presence. I explain to her what my working is and how I think I found myself by her water's edge because it is one of my favourite places of peace, somewhere I travel to in order to both connect with her as well as find air to breathe and peace to be rested. That the blue hues and various tones of my blue fibre had reminded me of these waters, and then I found myself here in spirit. The spirit hovering above the water nods and says only one thing. What you surrender, I shall wash away, but it can only be washed clean if you truly surrender it. Otherwise the problem is rinsed, but the stain is still there. I know exactly what this message means. Ultimately, there are no half measures when it comes to any form of emotional or spiritual healing. You have to do the work and face the grubby bits and stubborn stains of what many call the shadow sides of ourselves. Otherwise, it's all half-assed superficial fixing that does nothing but maybe put a band-aid over the wound and simply prolongs the recovery. I understand, was all I got to say, because as I said this, my yarn span out. And that was that. Without realising, I had spun all of the needed fibre onto the bobbin. It was slightly over full, and I had used up all of the fibre. I had been so deeply involved in the almost shamanic-like act of the working that about 20 minutes had passed by without me even being aware. It felt like only a moment. But here I was, back in everyday reality, and stretching from being sat at the wheel that timed out quite well in the end. I thought to myself how well it had done this, that maybe there was some aspect of divine timing to this. I did all of the whisperings and intention and even received a message of confirmation from Spirit before the yarn span out. The snow is heavier now outside and I realise that I am cold. I was so focused on my task that I had not noticed the chill night air creeping over my body. I decided to take a break here, so I light a candle and burn incense as an offering of thanks to all the spirits, ancestors and deities that have helped me in this working, including Bridget and Thriga, all of whom have helped me in this working in some way or another. I then slip my red Irish knit cardigan on before I head to the kitchen and make a hot oat milk cacao to warm me up. It's late now, so I shall finish the rest of the working tomorrow, which is an easy enough task. A casting square is a small patch formed from either knitting or crochet. In my family, I was taught that it was always advisable to have the square done roughly 9 by 9 inches, 9 being a sacred number of life, fertility, and time spent roughly in the womb. A sympathetic magical act of birthing intention and will. But this is not always necessary. Others will work more intuitively and create a square of whatever size they need. Both ways work. It comes down to you and your intention. There are no strict rules here. But one action is held in common. Words, intention, prayers or chants are all worked into every single stitch. It is this repetition that builds the power and rhythm. I suspect that this is where we get the popular spell rhyme, by knot of one this string I tie. You know the one, there are hundreds of variations out there. I've never been able to track down an origin to this working or rhyme. Instead, it seems like the many folk herbal remedies out there, shared wisdom and a central structure or theme, but will always vary slightly from practitioner to practitioner, each adding their own energy and twists and turns. And therefore, there is seemingly no one right recipe, or in this case, no one original rhyme. However, if I'm wrong and you do know the origins of this, please get in touch with me. You can find my details at the end of this podcast. I would really love to know the history of this working. However, as there are hundreds of variations out there, so too is there my own variation, and it goes like this. By knot of one, this spell's begun. By knot of two, it shall come true. By knot of three, my will flies free. By knot of four, it's out the door. By knot of five, this spell's alive, and it shall thrive. By knot of six, my will be fixed. By knot of seven, by the power of all the gods in the heavens. By knot of eight, I weave new fate. By knot of nine, this working shines. By knot of 10, so be it then. For me, this verse will be spoken over every single stitch for every other row of my casting square. So this is spoken on the first row, and then the second row is whispered the working's intention over every stitch. For example, I release all pain and blockages. Or if you were doing a binding, it might be, I bind Mr. Smith from slandering my name. Or if it was an ill working, it might be, I tangle and knot all of Mr. Smith's projects, or Mrs. Smith will come to harm. Obviously, I do not advocate for this sort of working. I highlight it for example purposes only. For a power increasing working, one might say, with every stitch my confidence grows, or with every stitch my power of will and influence of spoken word increases. There are, of course, potentially hundreds of ways in which a casting square can be done, and it can prove to be quite a cathartic act, especially if you're angry and want to be rid of someone who's done you harm, or you're worried about someone who's lost and potentially in danger, and you want to use a casting square to attempt to summon them home, or maybe to a place of safety. After the second row, the row of intention, and when that's done, the first row with the knot spell is spoken again, and so they both alternate, ensuring the final row is the knot spell verse. From there, the casting square is tied off and then cast into flames. Historically, this would have been by the hearth, but these are sadly no longer commonplace in homes anymore. We had a wood burner in our previous home, but not this one. I miss our hearth so much. There are other options, of course. For example, I now travel down the garden and set up the fire pit. Then, when the fire is good and hot, I cast the square into the flames. Similar can be done by burning the square in a fireproof dish in a safe and well-ventilated area. However, a word of caution. Casting squares should always be made of natural fibres, such as wool, cotton, etc., not synthetic materials like acrylic, polyester, or some fibres that look natural because they're plant-based, but are actually in fact ultra-processed and contain lots of chemicals. This is because when you cast these squares into flames, more often than not, they don't burn but melt, or spark everywhere from being flammable in an unpredictable way. The last thing you want is melted plastic and chemical fumes being breathed in. There's not much magical about that. Natural fibres also have a way of completing the natural cycle. They come from the earth, and their natural ashes return to the earth. Another thing worth noting is that you do not have to be able to spin your own yarn in order to create a casting square. You can, of course, buy natural organic wool and knit and crochet with that. Not everyone can spin, and that's okay. As a side note to this entry, in my time here in Lancashire, I have seen a similar working to this casting square magic, and it's the same in all but how the working is released. With casting squares, the working is usually released through fire and smoke and ashes and so on. The ashes can then be composted or scattered somewhere of significance to further enhance the working. But in this other way, it's known as a withering working. So you may make the square in much the same way it's crocheted or knitted, and again words and spells and intention are spoken over it in much the same way, but it is specifically used to wither things away. The three main examples being: 1, used to wither away an illness so that the person can become well again; 2, to wither away an enemy or perhaps just their influence; 3, to protect yourself by withering away the negative actions another may be doing, such as withering away their power if they're cursing you or causing you trouble at work, etc. Then, instead of burning the square, it's buried to naturally break down in the earth. So again, you would have to use a natural fibre like wool or even nettle. If you can get natural nettle fibre, you could theoretically use that. I'm told, in the instances of healing, the withering square might be buried under a plant of healing or with seeds for a plant that's associated with healing or easing the specific health complaint. So, for example, mullein if the person has lung issues, or St. John's wort for depression, and so on. And if it's a protective withering working, it might be buried with crushed seashells, eggshells, snail shells, and iron nails or broken glass. And if it's an ill working, it might be buried in a graveyard and with dog feces. But as for my casting square, tomorrow I shall crochet it in the manner of which I mentioned before, and then it shall be cast into the fire pit for releasing. I will then sweep up the ashes and I think take them to the local flash to scatter them there. It seems appropriate. From the time, mists and distance between us, blessings from me to you. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's podcast. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you'd like to explore more of my work, you can find me on my website, diaryofafolkwitch.com, or find me over on both my Facebook and Instagram pages under the name Diary of a Folk Witch. You can also find my work in Pagan Dawn magazine, where I submit quarterly articles on folk witchcraft. If you wish to contact me directly to offer feedback or to ask me anything, you can do so at diaryofafolkwitch@gmail.com. Thank you again.